This is Chapter 27 of Pride and Prejudice, or Chapter 4 of Volume 2. With no greater events than these in the Longbourn family, and otherwise diversified by little beyond the walks to Meryton, sometimes dirty and sometimes cold, did January and February pass away. March was to take Elizabeth to Hunsford. She had not at first thought very seriously of going thither, but Charlotte, she soon found, was depending on the plan, and she gradually learned to consider it herself with greater pleasure as well as greater certainty. Absence had increased her desire of seeing Charlotte again, and weakened her disgust of Mr. Collins. There was novelty in the scheme, and, as with such a mother and such uncompanionable sisters, home could not be faultless, a little change was not unwelcome for its own sake. The journey would, moreover, give her a peep at Jane, and in short, as the time drew near, she would have been very sorry for any delay. Everything, however, went on smoothly, and was finally settled according to Charlotte's first sketch. She was to accompany Sir William and his second daughter. The improvement of spending a night in London was added in time, and the plan became perfect as plan could be. So Elizabeth is going to visit Charlotte Lucas. It's been a while since she's seen her, so she misses her friend. It's also been a while since she's seen Mr. Collins, so she's forgotten a bit how annoying he is. It's good to get out of the house because Mrs. Bennet and her sisters, who are not Jane, are annoying her. So she's ready to go, and there's also novelty in it. So there's newness to this plan. So she is ready to go. And she's also going to stop for a night in London so that she can visit Jane and see how she's doing. The only pain was in leaving her father, who would certainly miss her, and who, when it came to the point, so little liked her going that he told her to write to him, and almost promised to answer her letter. So again, Mr. Bennet being very sarcastic, but also sincerely missing Lizzie here, says, make sure you write to me, and maybe I'll answer your letter. The farewell between herself and Mr. Wickham was perfectly friendly, on his side even more. His present pursuit could not make him forget that Elizabeth had been the first to excite and to deserve his attention, the first to listen and to pity, the first to be admired. And in his manner of bidding her adieu, wished her every enjoyment, reminding her of what she was to expect in Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and trusting their opinion of her, their opinion of everybody, would always coincide, there was a solicitude, an interest which she felt must ever attach her to him with a most sincere regard. And she parted from him convinced that, whether married or single, he must always be her model of the amiable and pleasing. So Elizabeth and Wickham part as friends. Wickham reminds her that Lady Catherine de Bourgh is a snob and very obnoxious, so he warns her about that. They come to an agreement that, or they believe, they come to an agreement that they are always going to think the same of different people, and they part as friends. And Elizabeth thinks even if he's married, even if he's single, he's a good example of what a good, friendly guy should be. Her fellow travelers the next day were not of a kind as make her think him less agreeable. Sir William Lucas and his daughter Maria, a good-humored girl, but as empty-headed as himself, had nothing to say that could be worth hearing, and were listened to with about as much delight as the rattle of the chaise. Elizabeth loved absurdities, but she had known Sir William too long. He could tell her nothing new of the wonders of his presentation and knighthood, and his civilities were worn out like his information. So she's traveling to see Charlotte with Sir William Lucas and with one of the Lucas daughters. They're both really not the best traveling companions. They're not that interesting. Sir William is a little bit ridiculous and funny. Elizabeth does appreciate, people's weird quirks, but she's known him too long, so he's no longer entertaining. It was a journey of only 24 miles, and they began it so early as to be in Gracechurch Street by noon. As they drove to Mr. Gardiner's door, Jane was at a drawing-room window watching their arrival. When they entered the passage, she was there to welcome them, and Elizabeth, looking earnestly in her face, was pleased to see it healthful and lovely as ever. On the stairs were a troop of little boys and girls whose eagerness for their cousin's appearance would not allow them to wait in the drawing-room, and whose shyness, as they had not seen her for a 12-month, prevented their coming lower. All was joy and kindness. The day passed most pleasantly away, the morning in bustle and shopping, and the evening at one of the theaters. So they arrive in London. Elizabeth gets to see Jane, and she sees that she's looking healthy and looking a little happier. Elizabeth then contrived to sit by her aunt. Their first subject was her sister, and she was more grieved than astonished to hear, in reply to her minute inquiries, that though Jane always struggled to support her spirits, there were periods of dejection. It was reasonable to hope, however, that they would not continue long. Mrs. Gardiner gave her the particulars also of Miss Bingley's visit in Gracechurch Street, and repeated conversations occurring at different times between Jane and herself, which proved that the former had, from her heart, given up the acquaintance. So Mrs. Gardiner says, it's hard for Jane to keep up her spirits all the time, and there are periods when she's really dejected and really sad. So Jane is still upset about Mr. Bingley. She's really not gotten over him. She has, though, officially given up the friendship between her and Caroline. Mrs. Gardiner then rallied her niece on Wickham's desertion and complimented her on bearing it so well. "But, my dear Elizabeth," she added, "what sort of girl is Miss King? I should be sorry to think our friend mercenary." Mercenary was a person who was hired to be a soldier. So in the past, they wouldn't always be loyal to a cause, but they would be paid to do something. So if they were fighting in a war, for instance, they may not believe in the country, the cause, the person that they were fighting for, but they were paid to do it. So they would go and fight. So when mercenary is used as an adjective, which it is in this sentence, it means someone who does something for their own gain, usually. It can be financial or monetary, but it doesn't always have to be. Just someone who does something for their own gain, and they're usually a little bit capricious. So they'll kind of like, they'll follow a whim. So they'll follow something they want and not really think about the consequences or who they hurt. So when Mrs. Gardiner asks about what Miss King is like, she's asking, I don't want to think of Wickham as mercenary. So I don't want to think of someone who just chases someone for their money. "Pray, my dear aunt, what is the difference in matrimonial affairs between the mercenary and the prudent motive? Where does discretion end and avarice begin? Last Christmas you were afraid of his marrying me because it would be imprudent, and now, because he's trying to get a girl with only £10,000, you want to find out that he is mercenary." So Elizabeth is like, wait a second, you told me that it wouldn't be wise if I married him, and now you're judging him for maybe following some money and dating someone. It's an interesting exchange. I don't know that we're supposed to judge either character for what they're saying, but I think as readers, we're supposed to reflect on, is what Wickham doing right? Is what Charlotte doing right? Is what Elizabeth thinks of each of them right? It just kind of makes us question marriage and money and people's motives, especially in the Regency era, but perhaps even today. "If you will only tell me what sort of girl Miss King is, I shall know what to think. She's a very good kind of girl, I believe. I know no harm of her. But he paid her not the smallest attention till her grandfather's death made her the mistress of this fortune? No, why should he? If it were not allowable for him to gain my affections because I had no money, what occasion could there be for making love to a girl whom he did not care about, and who was equally poor? But there seems indelicacy in directing his attentions towards her so soon after this event. A man in distressed circumstances has not time for all those elegant decorums which other people may observe. If she does not object to it, why should we? Her objecting does not justify him. It only shows her being deficient in something herself, sense or feeling. So Elizabeth says, hey, if she's not complaining about Wickham liking her, why should we? And her aunt has a pretty interesting retort. It shows that she's missing something. Either she's silly, she's missing sense, or she's missing feeling and emotion. So either she doesn't realize it, or she doesn't care and is emotionally closed off. So interesting debate here. Well, cried Elizabeth, have it as you choose. He shall be mercenary, and she shall be foolish. No, Lizzie, that is what I do not choose. I should be sorry, to think ill of a young man who has lived so long in Derbyshire. Oh, if that is all, I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Derbyshire, and their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire are not much better. I am sick of them all, thank heaven. I am going tomorrow where I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither matter nor sense to recommend him. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing after all. So Elizabeth is kind of done with everyone. Done with all men. So she says, I have a poor opinion of people who live in Derbyshire, kind of like nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Mr. Darcy, and their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Mr. Bingley. And thank goodness tomorrow I'm going to a place where the only guy there is really annoying and has no positive qualities at all. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing after all. She's again being very sarcastic and witty. At least she can laugh at Mr. Collins. Take care, Lizzie. That speech savors strongly of disappointment. Before they were separated by the conclusion of the play, she had the unexpected happiness of an invitation to accompany her uncle and aunt in a tour of pleasure which they proposed taking in the summer. "We have not quite determined how far it shall carry us," said Mrs. Gardiner, "but perhaps to the lakes." No scheme could have been more agreeable to Elizabeth, and her acceptance of the invitation was most ready and grateful. "My dear, dear aunt," she rapturously cried, "what delight, what felicity! You give me fresh life and vigor. Adieu to disappointment and spleen. What are men to rocks and mountains? Oh, what hours of transport we shall spend! And when we do return, it shall not be like the other travelers, without being able to give one accurate idea of anything. We will know where we have gone. We will recollect what we have seen. Lakes, mountains, and rivers shall not be jumbled together in our imaginations, nor when we attempt to describe any particular scene will we begin quarreling about its relative situation. Let our first effusions be less insupportable than those of the generality of travelers." So Mrs. Gardiner invites Elizabeth to come with her and Mr. Gardiner on a tour of the lake region of England, and basically go on a little vacation. And Elizabeth says, "Great, don't need to think about guys, can just kind of marvel in the wonders of nature." And that is chapter 27.